are you today?
Good.
How do you like the conference so far?
Great.
Excellent. Anybody here that's not from Atlanta, raise your hand. Excellent. You said you're from Virginia. Where are you from?
California.
California?
Right now Birmingham, but originally Nevada.
Excellent. Anybody else that's not from Atlanta?
He's in Athens.
Athens. Excellent. I'm there every fall on the weekends. Anybody else not from Atlanta? Yes? Gainesville? That works. Excellent. I'll go ahead and get one last person. Wisconsin. My name is Jennifer Bland. I'll be your speaker today. I'll be talking about Flexbox, giving you an overview of Flexbox, and then showing you actually real-world examples of how to use that. To give you some information about myself, my contact information is on the screen here. If you see the moniker Rat Race Grad, you will see that a lot of places on, my Twitter account is Rat Race Grad, my GitHub account is Rat Race Grad, so the files from the event are going to be on my GitHub account. My LinkedIn profile is Rat Race Grad, and the reason why I have that moniker is I used to be a programmer many, many years ago. I have the dubious distinction in my technical career of, one, I graduated from college before the IBM PC came out, and then I earned my MBA before the internet came out. So I used to be a programmer many, many, many years ago doing Lotus Notes programming. So how many of you have ever used Lotus Notes before, or ever heard of Lotus Notes? All right. How many of you are still using Lotus Notes today? Now you understand why I stopped being a Lotus Notes programmer, because nobody was using it anymore. And I went into a different area, and then I started, my last job, I was a project manager at Aaron's, the rent-to-own, lease-to-own company that's headquartered here in Atlanta. And actually Charlie Loudermilk, who this conference is building is named for, is the gentleman who started Aaron's. And I worked for Aaron's, and I was in their training department as a project manager doing trainings for both their store employees and their home office employees. And I had built up an internet marketing business, hence the moniker Rat Race Grad, because I always wanted to graduate from the rat race. And so after building up my internet marketing business, I was able to actually retire. And I retired at the age of 51, and I was retired for a couple of years. Picked up a book on JavaScript programming one day at the bookstore, worked through it and started learning the syntax. So things have changed since I last did programming, because the internet came out, you had the web, you had HTML, JavaScript, all that. It didn't exist back when I was last doing programming. And I was like, I really enjoyed programming when I used to do it. And I decided to stop my retirement and get back into programming. So I did one of those 3-month coding boot camps that everybody hears about. I did my coding boot camp that I did is called Hack Reactor, which is based out in California. I did the online version of it. I used to work for Apple Computer out in Silicon Valley. Been there, done that. I'm coming back to the, here. I'm not moving back out to California. For 2 reasons. One, I can afford to live here, and 2, we've got SEC football, neither of which they have in California. So I did the coding boot camp. 30 days after I graduated from the coding boot camp, I started working for CNN here, local in Atlanta, and I've been programming for the last 2 years. And so I'll probably be doing this for another 4 years until I'm 59, and then I'm done. So I appreciate you coming to see me when I've come out of retirement and before I go back into retirement again. So as part of my presentation, instead of doing the slides like you normally would have in a regular presentation and going through it, I'm going to be doing hands-on, so I'm going to be jumping back and forth between my slides, my code editor, and the browser so you can see it. So I'm going to leave this as is, so it's not going to be full screen. I hope that's okay. So if anybody in the back can't see, just move forward a little bit. So the first thing we're going to talk about is Flexbox and why do people want to use Flexbox. So if you were here at the previous presentation before me, and the gentleman was talking about Bootstrap and the problems that they've had with using Bootstrap at sales law, it kind of tells you why you ended up with Flexbox, because when you look at the history of CSS, CSS used to be, in the very beginning days, you actually ended up having to using floats and to position things in order to get things on the screen and make it look decent. And then you ended up with things like Bootstrap that came out that made things a little bit easier, but it was still hard to basically accomplish things. Like if you want to center something horizontally on a screen in CSS, it can be a little bit of a challenge, or if you want to center it, vertically, it can be very much of a challenge to do that. So what came out was Flexbox came out with the need to actually address those challenges that you have with CSS. That a lot of people, if you've done a lot of CSS programming, that people don't like it because you have to struggle with being able to accomplish different things. So by using Flexbox, you were able to do things that were a challenge in CSS. And so what it allows you to do is to give you that flexibility to actually have, like where the name Flexbox came from, because it gave you the flexibility of that box model that the CSS is known for, to be able to actually position things easily and efficiently on the screen without having to pull your hair out. So that's what I'm going to talk about, is how it works and then how to use it. You might want to say, well, I already know CSS, why do I need to learn something different? Or like the gentleman before me, he was talking about CSS Grid, is because it gives you things that you don't have today. And so one of the biggest benefits of Flexbox, how many of you have used Bootstrap or used that on your website? Very easy, very convenient thing. It's kind of a standard. A lot of people use it. You know how to do it. But the problem with using Bootstrap is it's something that you have to actually load with your website. So you actually have that extra level of code that goes out there. So if people are on a slow browser or on a slow phone, they want to be able to see it, it's going to take a long time before that page actually loads, because you're downloading this extra amount of content in order for them to actually see how things are displayed on your browser. Flexbox, on the other hand, is you don't have to load something else with your website to be able to use it. It's a CSS standard. So just like you have, using a display property is a CSS standard, things that are built in for Flexbox are a CSS standard. So you don't have to load things. So therefore, that burden that Bootstrap put on your website, you don't have anymore by using Flexbox. So it gives you easier to design it. It makes things faster to load because you're not having to download a huge amount of a library to go with it. And it provides you a lot of things that you can be able to do. So the number one thing that you want to ask is, if I design my website using Flexbox, is it going to work everywhere? There's a website out there called caniuse.com. If you're not familiar with that website, it's something that you need to bookmark. Because it will tell you, you think of anything that you want to think of from a programming standpoint, it will tell you what support is available for that product. So whether it be Bootstrap or Flexbox or certain CSS command, you can go here and you can actually see, and it gives you across the top a list of all the browsers, internet browsers that are available, all the different versions coming down. And it will tell you if you can use it in that browser and in that particular version. So if you have a website that you're building or an app that you're creating, and you want to know if you have a standard in your company, you say, I only support like the last 2 versions of browsers. And if the people are using anything below that, good luck. I hope it works. If it doesn't, sorry, you should upgrade, something along that lines. The only thing that you have to worry about when you start looking at Flexbox is it's great. Pretty much every browser out there supports it. The only ones that are kind of like you have the yellow part of it is Internet Explorer. And instead of saying, well, my thing is, were you expecting something different? Because Internet Explorer just doesn't support Squat very well, except for what they do. But this shows you that you can definitely go out and start using Flexbox and be able to have access to it with a wide range of websites that you have that you are available. So in order to use Flexbox, the way that it works is you just use a display command. So if you've ever used to using display, fixed, relative, absolute, static, those are the 4 possible values that you have for a display property. Now you have a new property that's called display flex. And that's what it takes to make something into using Flexbox. Once you define something as a flex container, anything that is an immediate child of that element in the DOM is becoming a flex item. So therefore you've impacted not only the container that you've just put the display flex on, but everything that's an immediate child underneath it. So first question that most people ask me is, well, what about things that aren't an immediate child? You know, you have something like a div, and then you have a div in there, and then you've got like an unordered list that's underneath it. Well, that's not a direct child of the parent that you've put display flex on. It's a child of like that other div. Well, you can make that div also display flex so that it impacts all of its children. So you can have multiple things that you can apply display flex to so that it applies to as many things as you need to have on the screen. And when you define things with Flexbox, it basically controls the orientation of how things are displayed on the screen. As we know from HTML, everything's normally read from left to right, top to bottom. When you're looking at Flexbox, you end up with something where you have your axis. So normally things are read this way, and then they're read this way. So they go across and then they go down. And getting ahead of myself. So what you do, like I was saying earlier, you end up going in and you say you define something as display flex. So in here, you have this, you have a container, and I just say display flex, and now I'm using Flexbox, so I have that available to me. It makes things a lot easier that you have it, it's on there. Once you have it on there, you have what you have is the axis available to you. So you have what's called the main axis, and then you have what's called the cross axis. And this, if you understand this concept, then you will understand how to place things on the screen when you're using Flexbox. So this is my main axis, and this down here is my cross axis. So you can control things both on the main axis as well on the cross axis. And you have to know the direction that things are going on, because that direction of the main axis and the cross axis will control how things are actually displayed on the screen. So here's what I was talking about earlier. You have the main axis and you have the cross axis. Then by default, when you put things in by flex, it's assuming that it's going to be reading from left to right and then from top to bottom. And the main axis is going to go from left to right, and the cross axis is going to be vertical to that and goes down. You can also change this and flip it around so that you can end up with your main axis going this way, and then so this is going to be your main axis. And then this becomes your cross axis, because whatever the main is, the cross is going to be vertical to it. So now things are going to be, by default, going from top to bottom, and then from there, it's going to be going from left to right. So when you go in and define a flex item, the default is that you've got the control going from left to right. So you can change that control, so you can change it to from left to right and put it in there. So here, going through is you've got an example of going out and putting things in. So by default here, we put this in. If you look at my CSS, I have a very simple div, and inside the div, I have 4 other divs with the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4. Very simple. And I've defined the parent, which is, this is the parent right here. I've defined the parent to be flex. And that, by default, impacts all of the direct children, which is going to impact all of my divs that are underneath it. Normally, if I have done this in CSS, let me save this, put it in. Normally, a div is a block level element. So even though there's more space left on the row, it's going to block off the entire row and move everything to the line below that. That's the normal thing that you would expect to see in CSS. So if I've come back in here and I change this parent to being display flex, and I come back up here and refresh, by default it comes back over here to what I had previously. The default is the main axis is going this way. So it's going to change the usual behavior of what you expect from a block level element, and it's going to actually display things all on the same row right next to each other. So instead of in CSS, normally what you would have to do is modify this to be display inline block to get that capability. And that's one of the things that Flexbox gives you. You can come in and then change the direction of the main axis. The default direction for your axis is it's a row, meaning going from left to right. You have the option of changing that to say that you're going to make it column, which means it's going to go from top to bottom. So if I come over here and look at it, I actually go back to what I would have expected in traditional CSS, because I'm going from top to bottom. You have the option also, besides row and column, is that you can actually do like column reverse. And when you do column reverse, it basically has now flipped them. So now instead of it going from 1, 2, 3, 4 down, it goes from 4, 3, 2, 1. So now when I have the column reverse, my axis, direction of my vertical axis, instead of going down, is going up. So if you look at that, you have to realize that direction has now changed. And you can also actually go in and change it to be row reverse. And so now it starts from, instead of going from left to right, it's now going from right to left. So you have that ability, and by just making one little change in a CSS line, I can completely change the orientation and the layout of the information that I have on the screen. All right, so now what we have is, looking at what we've talked about so far, is I come in here and I have an example. I wanted to give you some real world examples of how to use Flexbox. And one of the things we're going to work at is a calculator layout, being able to use that. So what I have here is I've got the same thing I have before. I have all of these divs, and then you have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and everything else like that. And you go out and you display it. Well, since I have it defined display Flexbox, it's going to read from left to right, and it's going to put everything that's out there on one line. So just with what I've showed you before on Flex, how do you think that we can make changes to this to actually end up with a calculator layout? Because normally a calculator layout, because if you think about it, I took the one that was on my cell phone and basically mimicked that. So you have the results on the first row, then you've got like 3 numbers, then you've got like 7, 8, 9, whatever, 6, 5, 4, 1, 2, 3 on the bottom line. How would you go out and change this code to be able to give you the layout of a calculator by using the functionalities of using Flex? Anybody got any suggestions?
Could you wrap it?
You can wrap it. We're going to do that in the second chance. Any other suggestions? Remember with Flex, when you just set a parent container as Flex, it impacts all the children that are underneath that. The default layout on a Flex is it reads from left to right. So I really want every row to be a row. So you can easily come back in and take this information that we have right here, and I end up basically taking, instead of taking all those things, putting a parent around it and making it flex for every single row that I want to have on my calculator. So I have my container here, so I have right here, for example, I have a flex container, which is going to impact the direct children, which are going to be buttons 7, 8, 9. So it's going to put 7, 8, 9 and the multiply character all on the same row. So if we come over and we look at this, we now have the start of what we need for a calculator. And all we did was take that information and we just put flex rows around it, and it basically put out exactly what we want on the screen. Now, as we go along, we'll see there's some things missing that you would expect from a regular calculator, and I'll show you how those things, how you can actually implement those things also within Flexbox, so that you can actually have it look exactly like you want on a calculator. All right, so the next thing that we talked about, you were asking about wrapping. By default, everything reads from left to right. When it hits the end of the screen, it's going to wrap around to the next row. There is a property that you can give in Flexbox that controls the wrapping that is available on the screen. So you can tell it whether to wrap or not wrap or something along that lines. And then basically, you know, the default value is that it just doesn't wrap. So that once it gets to the end of the screen, it doesn't wrap around to the next one. So it tries to squish everything down as possible just so that it can fit it on one line. So you have the option of being able to come back in. So we have here our example 4. This is what we had originally, where I had all of the one parent container as a Flexbox, and then underneath it all the buttons that correspond to the row that's on there. I can come in to my Flexbox design and I can add a property to say that I want it to wrap, which basically means when it hits 7, 8, 9, multiply, wrap, and then hits whatever the next numbers are that are on a row of a calculator. So you can have that capability that is built in. So when you come in here and you start looking at it, I have display flex. I've set a width of 200 pixels because once it hits that 200 pixels, I want it to wrap around to the next row. And so by adding this property right here of flex wrap, it will wrap it around to the next row. So if we look at what we have here, we end up with pretty much the same functionality by just adding one line of CSS code so that now it formats out exactly what I want for my calculator to be able to have. Right? Then the next thing that you want to have in terms of learning Flexbox. So we've talked about doing display flex, and then we've talked about doing the flex direction where you tell it to be either a row or column. We've talked about wrapping so that once it gets to the end, then it wraps around to the next row. There is a shortcut that you can put in that's called flex flow. And flex flow has actually 2 parameters that you give it. And the first parameter is the direction, whether it be row or row reverse or column reverse. And then the second parameter that you give it is whether or not you want it to wrap. So if you didn't want to write 2 lines of CSS code and you want to condense it into one, you can do that with the flex flow shorthand. So if we come over here to this example, what we have here is we have flex flow, and in one line I've combined 2 lines of CSS into one. It makes things easier. It's up to you if you want to use it or if you prefer to just have both of them in there and have available to you. Then the next one that we have is a thing that's called flex property. Flex property is basically flex, and then it has 3 parameters that you pass into flex. So the three parameters are grow, shrink, and basis. And the reason why they're there is that Flexbox gives you built-in responsive design without having to, like if you were using Bootstrap, you would tell it, column, large 12, but if you're on a medium-sized screen, you do column medium 6, and then if you're on a phone, then you might do column extra small 12, and you have to put in all these values to account for different screen sizes so that it gives you that responsive design. With Flexbox, by using the Flex Grow and the Flex Basis and the Flex Shrink option, you can actually tell it as the screen grows or shrinks to adjust accordingly. So you have that option to be on there. And then the basis is basically of the space that's available to it, what percentage of that space do you want to take up? So you can tell it to take up, let's say, for example, 100%. So therefore, if you have it set to go from border to border at 100% as you adjust the screen, it's going to still be from the left margin all the way over to the right margin. So you have that available. And what this allows you to do from the Flex property is it actually tells you how much of a space to take up. The default value is 0. If you say 1, then it basically means everything's going to take up an equal space that's on there. If you give it 2, then it means take up twice as much space as I would normally give something. So when we go back to our calculator over here, one of the things that you see missing is like the equal sign. The equal sign by default, if you look at the calculator on your cell phone, it's basically, it's a flex of 2 because it's taking up two spaces that are on there. So in order for me to get the equal sign to take up double the space, and so it would look exactly what I expect to have on a calculator, is I would come in for the equal, and I would have to just give it a value of flex and then give it a value of 2. And by doing that, now my equal will be double width. The other thing that you can do is you have the 0 at the top, which is the result. Normally by default it's one character, one column, so it would be definitely lined up with the AC, the 410 column. I want my results to go the whole length of the calculator. Well, what we have here, if I just change my results to say flex 4, because there are 4 columns, it goes the full length, and so therefore I can basically come in and very simple in terms of CSS designs, tell it to use flex, tell it to wrap. In this case, I'm using wrap instead of dividing each row into its own parent. And then I've told the results to say flex 4, so it pulls out the whole length. And then I can change my equal to say flex 2. And now that will adjust automatically. If my screen increases or decreases, it will be basically double, whatever size it is as it adjusts. And I don't have to worry about media queries. So if you've ever used CSS, you've had to do media queries where you say, well, if you come down to this screen, then you change the CSS to be something else. By default, by putting in, a flex grow or a flex shrink, it's going to adjust for you automatically, so you don't have to worry about that. Which is one of the benefits that you get out of using Flexbox. All right, so now I just kind of went through and explained to you about how the Flex Grow and the Flex Shrink works, and it basically adjusts things out on the screen. So now what we can do is we can come back up here to example 6. In here, what we've done is for our results, we've got it set to 1, and then in here, let's see, I don't have it, actually, let me see what this looks like. Here we've got it in, we've got the equal sign up as a double length. We've got these results set up so that it goes full length across, so that we have that flexibility that's put on there. And then the only other thing that I've done to make it look good is for the numbers, I've set one color background. And then for all the, like arithmetic operations, I've set that to be orange, and then I've set the result, to have a black background. And it looks exactly like the calculator that I have on my cell phone. So you can see how easy it is to come out and actually put things together, with Flexbox. Then the other one was I talked about earlier about controlling alignment, because you have both the main axis and you have the cross axis. So once you put things on the axis, so right now in my calculator, for example, all of the squares are right next to each other, which is kind of what I want to have for a calculator. But let's say you have one of the things that you have from a CSS standpoint is you end up with like a three column, layout on your page. So that's very common that you see if you're using Bootstrap, is that you have content that is in 3 columns and you want them to be equal distance between each other and stuff like that. You can actually control items that are on the axis, both either the main axis or the cross axis, by setting different settings available to it. So on your main axis, whatever your main axis is, because your main axis, if it's row, it's going from left to right. If your main axis is column, it's from top to bottom. If it's reverse, it could be from right to left or from bottom to top. You have a thing that you can put in that's called justify content. And that's how you justify the items on the main axis, whatever direction the main axis is currently based on. And when you basically put in a specification for justify content, you can actually put things in and you can tell it to be justify center. You can do space between, space around. So you get a wide range of things that are available to you. So here gives you an a visualization of, so on the top row, if you say that you have the justify content, and you say that your justify content is going to be flex start, so it's going to be wherever the main axis starts. So in this example, my main axis is a row, so it's going from left to right. So it's going to start lining things up at the start of my main axis. The flex end, you can see that it's now shifted everything over to the right. So in CSS, that's your traditional method of you floating something right to be able to put it out on the right side. You just specify the content to be flexed in, and it puts it all the way over to the right side of your main axis. The center is it actually centers it immediately on the screen. One of the most challenging things that you have in CSS is centering things by just saying, justify content center, you're done. You've got it centered on the screen. Then you have 2 other ones that are available around you called space between and space around. The difference between space between and space around was space between the end items on the row are going to be flushed left and flushed right if your main axis is a row. And then the white space is going to be evenly distributed on every item other than the end ones on the row. So you can see here that they are flushed on the margins, the left and right. With space around, what it does is it actually puts padding to the left and right of the end items. And when you look at it, you would think, oh, well, the space between the first item and the second item is double the space that's on the end. And that's true because what they're doing is that they're saying, in this case, there's 3 items. So each item is going to get, let's say, 20 pixels on either side. Well, in the middle where those 2 meet, you've got 20 pixels for this item and 20 pixels for this item. So it's really 40 pixels of space. And so that's why the end only has 20, because you're getting one item that's on the side around it. So you can easily, the space between is a great way if you want to do, let's say, for example, a 3 column or a 2-column or a 4-column layout on the screen is that you can put 4 divs in, and then just say on those 4 divs, you just say space between, and they will immediately be spaced out on the screen. And as you move the screen size, make it bigger or smaller, it's going to adjust automatically for you, so you don't have to worry about making any changes. So you don't have to worry about, like Bootstrap, setting a different column size for, extra small or small or medium or large. This is done for you automatically within Flexbox. Now, the other item that you have is if your main axis is a column, those same things that are available to you, you have your Flex Start, your Flex End, but they're going to change based on being a column, meaning it's going to read from top to bottom. So now my stuff is going to start at the top of the page. Flex End, they're going to start at the bottom of the page. Flex Center is basically what it's going to do is for each element, the center of that element is going to be all lined up. And you can see they're different size boxes, but if you drew a line horizontally, it's going to go down the center of every single box regardless of the height. A good example of using something like using centered is, how many of you have ever seen like pricing boxes? If you've gone out and you want to buy something, they're like, okay, here's this box, and the entry-level thing, you're going to get all of this thing, and it's going to have this price. And then they'll have another box that's a little bit taller, and this is like the supermodel, and you're going to get all these features, and it's going to cost this. And then they'll have a third box, and it's going to be, you get these things, and usually the left and right one, are the same height, but the middle one is taller. By just coming in and saying center, you achieve that that same result automatically, regardless of the amount of text that you actually have in those pricing boxes available to them. Stretch basically comes out and it says it's going to stretch it from top to bottom on the screen, and it's going to basically take that content and basically spread it out. You may not like doing that, but for example, a good example of using something stretch is if you have a traditional website, you have your header, you have your footer, you have your content, and then you have like your sidebar. When the content ends on the sidebar, you don't want it to just go to a different color background until it reaches the footer, because your content can, you might end up having to scroll a couple of pages to get to the end. By setting your sidebar to be stretch content, therefore it's going to go from your header to your footer, and you get that consistent, whatever color background that you have for your sidebar all the way down to the bottom. That was very challenging to do in CSS because you never knew how tall your content was, because somebody's writing an article, you don't know if they're writing 500 words or 5,000 words, but you need to account for that, and that's one of the benefits that you get with Flexbox. All right, then the next thing that you have is, we've talked about aligning items along the main axis. The next thing that you have is, how do you align things along the cross axis? And you can do that by coming out and doing what's called align items. So here, this is where you're aligning items on the cross axis, not the main axis, but the cross axis. So you can go through and actually use these. How many of you ever seen the website Flexbox Froggy? It's a great website. If you want to use it, if you want to learn how to use Flexbox, it kind of gives you a little bit, and then you have to put the frog on top of the lily pad in the water. And you have to move them around based on just putting these very simple variables that are on there. And if you go through all the different levels and you get to the very last one, it's very challenging because you're actually having to line things not only on the main axis, but also on the cross axis. So that's one of the challenges that you have available to you, on Flexbox, and which makes it a lot easier to use because you can control things going this way, whether it's spaced out, has some space in between them, are you stretching them, but then everything that's on the cross axis, you can actually style it individually also, which is a nice feature. All right. Then here we've got the aligned content. This is what I was talking about earlier. So you've got stuff that's in here. So this is what you're going to see on the cross axis, where everything is, filling out full length, and then it might either start at the top or the center or the end on the cross axis. So your horizontal axis is your main axis. Your cross axis is going down, and then this is the results that you can get on that vertical axis. You can say space between, space around, you can use stretch, so you have that control on that cross axis. All right, then the last one that I wanted to leave with you in terms of real world examples is a traditional website layout. Most people were like, okay, those are like a little bit of challenging. But we talked about earlier, it's the same, if you look at the same thing that we did from our calculator layout, your header across the top and your footer across the bottom, you're going to basically change the basis to be 100%, so that it takes up 100%. It's going to be defined as a flex row for the header and the footer. So you can define those individually as a row so that they control everything that's on there. But then what you might have is you have a left sidebar, your content in the middle, and a right sidebar. Those are actually going to be displayed as a column. They're not actually displayed as a row. They're going to be displayed as a column. So now what you can do is basically combine a row and a column to give you that layout. And then what we talked about earlier, for example, the sidebars that you have on either side of the content, if you want them to go all the way distance from the top to the bottom, then you can just do justified content, and you can tell it to stretch so that it goes all the way from the top to the bottom. And very simple, with about 5 lines of code, you've created a responsive web layout, and then you can change things. One of the things that you can do is you can put them in like this. You have the option of specifying an order in Flexbox. So by default, when you're looking at the HTML for this, the left sidebar is going to be in your HTML first. The content is going to be next. And then the right sidebar is going to be listed third in the HTML if you're looking at your code. You can actually come in with Flexbox and you can actually change the order. So if you want, you can actually say, even though they're in the HTML in that order, you could say, for example, you can change the order of the right sidebar to be second. So what you end up with is a left sidebar, a right sidebar, then the content taking the rest of the screen. So you have that ability to basically move things around very simply by just giving it an order and telling it the order that you want it to go in. By default, the default value for order is 0, meaning whatever order that it's put into the HTML, that's what I'm going to take. So if you start giving it numbers, so if you give your left sidebar a value of 1, you give your right sidebar a value of 2, and then you give your content of an order of 3, they're actually going to show up on the screen in that order, even though that's not the order that they were put into the HTML. So you can, if you want, to combine Flexbox with using media queries, which is something that you use frequently within CSS, is that you can tell it as things to get smaller on a smaller screen. So instead of having 3 columns of sidebars and stuff like that, then you can basically change the order that's on them, give them orders of 1, 2, 3, but set their basis to 100%. So what that means is your left sidebar would be from left to right, and then below that you would have your content, and then below the content you would actually end up having the right sidebar. So therefore things get changed based on the size of the screen that's available on there. And then by combining it also with flex basis, you can say, okay, when I get to something really small, I don't want it to be 3 columns, I just want it to be 1, and then you have that ability to put it in there. Okay? All right, so that's the end of the information that I have. My contact information, feel free if you have ever any questions to reach out to me. As I mentioned earlier, my email address is ratracegrad@gmail.com. Ratracegrad is my moniker, so it's my email address. My GitHub account is ratracegrad. My Twitter account is ratracegrad. My LinkedIn is ratracegrad. I have a website, ratracegrad, so if you're interested in internet marketing, you can see that. But the only thing that's abnormal about that is my website just happens to be called jenniferbland.com. So feel free to check that out. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, send me an email, ask me a question. If you send me an email and I don't respond in like a day or two, don't hesitate to resend me another email, because I have my internet marketing business. If you look at my phone, and if it's recording right now, but if I take it out and looked at it, in my inbox, I have literally over 3,000 emails that I haven't even read yet. So if you send me an email and I don't respond, send me another one, because it might come in where I'm just not looking at it, and I don't go back and look at things that are old, unless it's for my family, then I'll read those. But feel free to definitely reach out to me on multiple occasions if I don't get to you the first time. All right, and then the last thing is I appreciate you coming. Please feel free to help us out in terms of the conference. Women Who Code Atlanta has put on this conference today. We appreciate you all coming. But what we would like to do is we would like to hit #1 on Twitter, trending for our hashtag, which is WeRiseTech, all one word. So if you have a Twitter account, help us to reach #1 so that people take notice of us and know who we are. So if you could tweet about your experiences, tweet about attending my event today, but please use the hashtag WeRiseTech. And we appreciate it very much, and hopefully next year we'll see you for the 2nd annual We Rise conference. Okay, thank you.